So one of the more interesting aspects for Dragon Kaneki is the evolution process that happens to him after he comes out. He is a completely different being, something that kind of transcends the normal logistics of a ghoul and what we originally knew of Kaneki. Unfortunately, there's not much clarification for us. There's only mere speculation and the ideas that kind of boil and bubble up in people's minds. But today I'm going to try my best to kind of connect what Kaneki was at the end of the story after Dragon to an idea that I've somewhat touched upon regarding the origin of ghouls and the original RC cell. So I think for clarification, I want to kind of explore just a small portion of the origin of ghouls and the original RC cell and the original ghoul, right? The reason I want to do this is that I believe it actually has a direct connection to what Kaneki was, but more specifically, as well as Rize. Straight off the bat, if you haven't seen my video on the first ghoul and kind of trying to come up with an idea on how the ghouls were born into this world, that would definitely help you have a better understanding on what I'm about to talk about. But regarding the origin of ghouls, and more specifically, the specific RC cells and Kagune type, as you know, there's 4 different ones, and they have 4 specific traits, and the organ itself is kind of depicted along the back. It's low back to kind of top of the shoulders. When you think of the first ghoul, right, or at least when I think of the first ghoul, I think of a ghoul that has none of that. Something that's a lot more, I guess, simplistic in design, as the specific types of Kagune usage seems very strict. It seems it's a specific trait that has happened due to the evolution of ghouls, and something that most likely took place over time in terms of splitting different cells, specific tribes or ghouls having a Yukaku and another specific tribe or ghoul having a Rinkaku, whatever. The first ghoul, however, I believed had none of that, or had all of that, maybe. What I mean by this is I don't think the first ghoul would have been specifically born with a Rinkaku type of RC cell and Kagune. When you have that idea in your head, how would you get to those specific types of RC cells? Most likely, in my mind, different tribes cannibalizing and incesting in different ways, mixed with the evolution process, but also mixed with where they are from. It may be a little bit silly, but a simple way to kind of implement that evolutionary process, and specifically separating the RC cell into 4 different parts, would actually be climate change. Different ghouls across the globe living in different areas, and the organ in the back kind of moving around to somewhat accompany the climate that they live in, the weather that they face, and the issues and the situations, right? This is a pretty normal thing, and trying to relay this into the story helps kind of make a lot of sense. So you start off with the first ghoul that most likely had all of the Kagune types, or like a chimera version of it, which was unknown at the time, but you kind of go through evolution a little bit more, different tribes start to pop up, and then the situations they front, the climate that they live in, probably start to close in onto an RC cell that's a lot more specific and a lot more adaptable to their situation or their current living conditions. Now that you kind of have some sort of idea on the 4 different Kagune types and the abilities, relaying this all the way back to Kaneki and what he specifically was actually makes a lot of sense. So the first thing I want to talk about regarding Dragon Kaneki is his change, his traversal into something else entirely. So we obviously known Kaneki as a Rinkaku ghoul, which is obviously Rize's type. The thing is with Rize is that she's very specific, she's very powerful. The pure Washu RC cells, obviously very specific to her, relaying that back into Kaneki, and then obviously Dragon. One of the more interesting things that Dragon specifically done, not Kaneki, was actually take out Kaneki's human DNA, which is something that all artificial ghouls actually have. It's a process that cannot necessarily be removed, and it's kind of like a linchpin to death. As much as you've become an artificial ghoul and you can heal from incredible wounds, you're still at the process of that small portion of human DNA that relays in the body, which causes the rapid aging process. Takizawa had it, Amon had it, even Kuruna and Shiro have it, right? The Ogai squad members, a little bit different. They most likely also had it as well. But regarding all of those experimentations I've just mentioned, everyone had like a different style, a different process of being experimented on, with Kaneki being the foundation. He is the rawest purest form for it. Getting rid of that human DNA is a crazy thing, and you specifically see a picture of Kaneki when he's first pulled out of Dragon with his body completely changed. Dragon has somehow manipulated and completely remolded his body to change him from that original artificial one-eyed ghoul that we know him as to specifically what could be a natural half ghoul. That human DNA is no longer a thing, or at least that human DNA that was killing him is no longer a thing. He still could have portions of human DNA, just like the half ghouls do have, which allows them to eat normal human food as well, which is kind of evident with Eto and her kind of depiction for it, but Kaneki could potentially be that next step. What we've seen from Kaneki in the showcase after he came out of Dragon with him facing Furuta was something else entirely. We found out that he had a abundance of new organs that have never actually been seen before. And when you think about the history of ghouls and how long ghouls and humans have been fighting for, to kind of come across a completely new organ is very interesting. Something that I think would have to date so far back to what would be the origin of ghouls, where that organ may have actually been pretty common, and that the humans specifically know nothing about because of the evolution process. The only thing they've come to ever known is the 4 different types of Kagunes and their abilities. What was Kaneki? The thing is with Kaneki is that he showcased some amazing things. His Kagune usage, in my head, wasn't actually specific to any sort of Rinkaku, Yukaku, etc, etc. It was kind of a mix of all 4. With knowing what I originally talked about at the beginning, slowly starts to make sense. Most noticeably as well is his usage, something that was so easy for him to come in connection with. Once he knew that he could use his abilities without going out of control, it was all breezy from there. His abilities were far out of this world, and a full Kakuja wasn't even needed. Funny enough, we've never seen a full Kakuja from Kaneki, at least the complete picture for it. We've seen snippets with the Suzuya fight, we've seen some sort of half Kakuja with the Arima fight, but we've never actually seen it. What Kaneki was at the end was something that I believe didn't necessarily need it. Probably one of the rawest forms. Connecting that back once again makes a lot of sense, as a full Kaguya, even a half Kaguya, necessarily wouldn't have been a thing back in the origin of ghouls. So Kaneki showcases not only these crazy abilities that range from all the 4 different types of Kagunes, but also incredible healing. Just manifesting on a very small portion of Dragon's RC cells managed to completely heal him in an instant, right? And I mean some split-second stuff. We have never seen anything like that before. Being able to heal so rapidly, so quickly, so proficiently is absolutely insane. You get a very good showcase of Kaneki's abilities in that Furuta fight right at the end. He goes through a lot of different processes, uses a lot of different techniques, and they come so naturally to him. Not only that, but his body morphs with it. If you've noticed, even though his body was completely healed, the Kagune would kind of become a lot more aggressive and apparent in his body, especially under his eyes, where it would kind of cascade around his cheek and onto his jawline, as well as his neck, and even his chest completely changed to help, I guess, kind of adapt and use these newfound abilities. This seems like a very fundamentally raw process of Kagune usage. Nothing specific to a certain type, but his entire back could specifically be one Kakaho, which, if you haven't already guessed, is the organ where the RC cell is kind of stored. And depending on that location, obviously, what type of Kagune type you have. These new organs also come into play, which could also evidently be that new specific Kakaho, but for some reason they couldn't identify that. They didn't actually know. They did also mention that the new organs could have been like a filter to actually be able to absorb Dragon's RC cells because of how pure they were and how aggressive, and allowing Kaneki to use that with himself. The last thing that was extremely interesting to me after seeing these incredible showcase of abilities is when he goes up against Rize, or at least the dragon counterparts of Rize. There is one very, very small panel which I really wish I could show that actually liquefies his entire state, or at least the Kagune coming out of his back. It's almost equivalent to Furuta's full Kaguya in design. I'm not sure if Ishida was going for that on purpose, but to me, just seeing that very small panel, and we only see it once, when he kind of gets completely obliterated by all of these dragon kind of limbs coming after him, and he gets like squashed and eaten for the most part. He obliterates all of them, kind of like an explosion, and you see the wings wings or his Kagune on his back a lot more liquefied in design. Something similar to potentially a full Kaguya, but it wasn't cascading around his body, it wasn't an armor, it wasn't a suit. His Kagune wasn't a solid state. It was, at least with the way it was drawn, it was something else entirely. That very small panel, I don't think anyone's ever talked about. And it may not evidently be anything. It might have just been like a design that Ishida wanted to use. It was so uniquely different. It was so hazily drawn, and it had a very similar resemblance to Furuta's full Kaguya, which his Kaguya wasn't a solid state, let's say similar to Eto Yoshimura's or even Arata's specific armor, or Takizawa. It seems somewhat liquefied. Without a doubt in my mind, Kaneki was something else entirely. I believe he had all 4 different types of Kagune abilities, but not specifically using them in individual factors. You know, I wouldn't consider him to be a chimera similar to Hinami or even Shikurai, who could use all 4. I feel like Kaneki was definitely something else that kind of relates back to closer to the origin of ghouls, and him having all 4 Kagune types, it was more so specifically joined into one. Instead of them being separate Kakahos, they were all joined together, and he could kind of just rapidly change everything on the fly. He didn't have to kind of grow a new Kagune out of his body to use that specific ability. You know, he didn't have to grow a Kokaku or a Yukaku to use it. He could kind of just morph his own Kagune that was already out to adapt to that fighting style that he wanted. And that's another thing that's heavily showcased. There's definitely a lot of mysteries that happen with Dragon Kaneki. What he was, what he is, what he turned into, his healing process, his Kagune ability, everything is completely unknown to us. It opened up the door of what potentially could have been a story that tells the origin of ghouls, or at least a more detailed version of the RC cells and how they work in nature. Will Ishida ever explore Dragon Kaneki after this? What he evidently evolved into, what specifically Rize could have been if she was birthed fully, if she was completed? I don't know. But it's definitely an interesting topic, and hopefully this helps you get some sort of idea on what Dragon Kaneki, after he came out, could have potentially been, and maybe the quote-unquote next step in evolution for ghouls. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, but I will see you in the next one.